Today I'll quickly introduce and we'll get started to John Towsley, who is going to be talking to us about the service desk and the concept of the learning desk. John.
Thanks, Rick, and welcome everybody. Today we are going to talk about the transformation of your service desk to a learning desk, and in particular about how we use performance support tools to do that. As has been mentioned, if you have questions, go ahead and enter those into your chat window, and Rick will interrupt me at the appropriate time. Happy to make this a dynamic conversation to the best of our abilities. What we're looking to drive towards today is some understanding of what performance support is and how that can be implemented on your service desk. See how learning at the moment of need, which is something we drive towards in performance support, can drive down call volumes and help with that sort of holy grail we've been driving towards in the service desk industry for a while, user self-sufficiency. I'll talk about a case study, and we'll also show you some samples and sort of go to in a bit of a demo mode, just not to do a sales pitch, but to show you an example of what can be done using this particular kind of tool set. So that's what we'll try and accomplish in the next 40 minutes or so. All I got to do is get my slide to advance and we'll be good. There we are. Okay, so first let's start with a little problem definition. About 0.7% or $130 billion of U.S. revenues from training, or that percentage of revenues is spent on training, and that's from a trainingindustry.com survey. So the question is, how effective is that? And when we look at the facts, we find that people forget 90% of what they learn in a classroom within 30 days. In the learning industry, this has been known for quite a while. In the service desk industry, I think we know that intuitively because pretty clearly we're on the receiving end of the things that people are forgetting. Another fact, workers spend about 8.8 hours per week searching for information. So that could be searching internally or searching externally, Googling. A lot of that searching does happen internally. For those of you who have knowledge bases, document management systems, intranet sites, I'm sure you're painfully familiar with the kind of complaints or comments we see from our colleagues and employees in the organization are saying, yeah, it's great that that's out there, but I can't find what I'm looking for. 76% of users have a failed or substandard understanding of mission-critical applications. That obviously manifests itself in chats, emails, and calls to the support desk. And as I think we're all painfully familiar, from a service desk professional perspective, the bigger cost is not so much the cost of calls and support as the user productivity and downtime. Effective adoption of applications is painfully low still, and that's from 2012. I don't think it's improved much in the last year or so. There are a bunch of reasons for that, and we'll talk a little bit about them and how performance support is related to that. In particular, though, obviously for today's discussion, the question arises, how can we affect that in order to drive calls down? So if adoption is low, there's obviously a correlation between that poor adoption and the support requests that we see coming into the service desk. So the question is, are you expected to own these problems? And I think the answer is, to a high degree, yes. While the training and development folks, either within IT or in the HR group, are clearly in many cases expected to own those problems, there's also an expectation back on the service desk. So if people are not effective, they're forgetting, they're searching and can't find things, they don't understand how to use mission-critical applications, or they're not using them because they don't know how to use them or what they're to be used for, then clearly some of that responsibility falls back to the service desk as well. So whether you're expected to own them or not, I think you would probably agree that in some ways you do. So this gentleman, Seymour Papert from MIT, said you can't teach people everything they need to know. The best you can do is position them where they can find what they need to know when they need to know it. And that's really what performance support is all about. And if you think about it, the direct connection through to our efforts in the service desk industry is that if people can't find or don't know what they need to know when they need to know it, quite often we're the first port of entry, right? So if they can't lean over a cubicle and ask somebody next door, or they do and they don't know, the next thing they want to do is call somebody and get a quick answer, and they're going to call us. So the challenge that we've had historically, and I think you probably see this most often in relation to system implementations, new software rollouts, upgrades, enhancements, that kind of stuff, is somewhere near the end of a project plan, if you're really good at communicating with your colleagues and your organization is fairly mature, then maybe this happens near the beginning of a project plan. We talk about training. Hey, we've got to train not only the support professionals, but we have to train all the users of this application or the people engaged in the process. And more, as we look at ERP systems as such, that's a pretty blurry line. The use of an application and what buttons to push is one thing, but the process and how we understand the process flows and when to do what is tightly integrated with that. So what we've done historically is we've built into the project plan some level of training, and we're trying to get people up to this concept and task mastery. So they understand what they're supposed to be doing, and they know how and why the workflow happens, and they know what buttons to push. And that all happens in training. Then when we exit the training event or series of events, and they could be webinars, they could be e-learning, they could be classroom training, all of those things, then what we want to do is transfer that capability to on the job. And the problem we have is that, as you saw in that previous slide, post the training event, we can't possibly remember or know everything we're supposed to know. These are, in many cases, broad-based, large applications with lots of buttons to push, connected to sometimes complex workflows and tasks, lots of what-ifs and then else's in the process, right, depending on the situation and so on. So our competency on the job is not very high within several weeks of training, let alone being able to sustain that through continuous improvement. So the question is how do we handle that, and how do we drive towards sustainment? And the answer is through performance support. And I hope that you can already start to see this connection and the thought, the stream that I'm going down, which is the connection between driving up on the job competency and continuous improvement and driving down support time, costs, calls, and all of those things. So what are we talking about when we talk about performance support? Well, this is not new stuff. Many of you may know of Gloria Gary, one of the pioneers in electronic performance support systems, and probably earlier than 91, but this quote comes from 1991. She set up this definition, right? An orchestrated set of technology-enabled services providing on-demand access to integrated information, guidance, advice, assistance, training, and tools to enable a high level of job performance with a minimum of support from other people. Fantastic, very clear, we get it. Way to go, Gloria. The challenge is in 1991, while we understood this conceptually and we could see the technologies that were evolving and or existed to drive this, all the building blocks weren't quite in place. From my perspective, we're at a very, very interesting time in the history of organizations and technology and performance support. I mean, if for no other reason than because we're all connected all of the time now, and the cost of building and developing some of these applications has decreased, the cost of storage and the speed of retrieval has increased, cost of storage decreased, it's now possible to execute on some of the theories that Gloria was espousing back in 1991. And that makes for a pretty exciting time in my strange and weird way of getting excited about things like process and performance support. So I'm going to put forward a theory just to give you a little bit more background, and then we'll fairly quickly launch into some examples and tie them back to service desk. But a couple of gentlemen in the training industry, Bob Mosher being one of them, have been studying this for a number of years and have looked at what they call a model of 5 moments of need. And you'll see how some of these connect back to the service desk in a second. But if you think about it logically, the first 2 moments of need we're pretty good at, and we've understood for a long time. So the first time I need to learn something, or when I need to learn more about a particular topic, I'm really good with formal instructions. So if you think about, let's get back to the analogy or the case of a system rollout. If I'm rolling out an application, or we're rolling out a new version of Office or whatever that might be, we're pretty good at building into the project plan the budget and the resources, connecting to our colleagues in HR, whatever that might be, to design, test, and roll out formal instruction. So people are acquiring the knowledge that they need to know in advance of the system or in conjunction with the system being rolled out. And usually that's fairly effective in terms of, as we saw in the previous graph, generating competency at or shortly after the training event or sequence of events. So there's nothing wrong with this. We use adult education principles. You know, there's a number of different models for developing training that the HR or IT training folks will use. We have professional instructional designers, and they plug into project plans and project management, and they look at adult learning styles. They do a great job at all of that kind of stuff, and that gets rolled out. The challenge is, what do I do for the next 3 moments of need? So below the line here, when I'm trying to apply or remember something, so go back to that previous graph, and you think, okay, so within 48 hours, whatever that is, if I've lost 70% of what you told me in the classroom or what I heard in the webinar or what I learned in the e-learning program, now I'm on the job and I'm trying to do something. Well, how do I do that? So take the case of a service desk employee. So here I am, I got the training, you know, I got some mentoring, and now I'm trying to log a call, and here comes a call that I kind of type call I've never had before. I know I need to classify it, and I know I need to set the priority on it, and I know you taught me that in class, but I got the customer on the call right now, and what do I do? So in the heat of the moment, what happens is that I need some immediate support, reminder, tickler. And the way we've addressed those historically has been with, you know, laminated job aids, checklists, and then if you look at the service desk world, we've tried to say, hey, we'll have a service catalog, and we'll have a knowledge management system, and we'll let you search, and you can find documents and all that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with those things. They're not quite performance support, though, because typically, I think what you'll find if you talk to your analysts, you know, in the heat of battle here, when someone's on the phone and I'm trying to keep them calm and calm them down, and I'm trying to get a first call resolution within a reasonable time frame because I know you measure me on that, I'm really not going to go search the knowledge base for a 14-page PDF and then search through that document to find the answer that I'm looking for. So that's when I'm trying to apply the knowledge. Similarly, when something goes wrong, or when something changes. So things change in our infrastructure. That's not the way you log in anymore. If you take a very simple example, right? That's changed, or the URL changed, or the way that we, you know, process this transaction inside an application may have changed because of a regulation, whatever that may be. I'm not going back to class to learn that. It's one thing. You know, there's no point in running webinars even, or lunch and learns. So maybe there was an email and a bulletin, and maybe somebody changed the documentation. Maybe I missed that. I was on vacation. I don't know. But that's the role of performance support at those other 3 moments of need, is to try and address that. And as I've said, we've made some steps in the service desk world by documenting a service catalog. What are all the things that we support in the first place? And then trying to move towards knowledge-centered service with knowledge bases and you know, proactive training and that kind of stuff. but I think we're probably not quite there. So what's the difference between those things, say, contextual embedded help in our application and a knowledge base and a document management system? What's the difference between those and what I'm talking about in terms of performance support? So the concept that we like to think about is it's got to be ready in 2 clicks and 10 seconds. And if you get engaged in the application development world in the any kind of thin client application, then you probably have seen these kind of things before, right? People going to websites or using applications, whatever. If it's more than 2 clicks and takes more than 10 seconds, they bail, right? Not interested. Didn't find what I'm looking for. It has to be embedded, so embedded in the workflow and readily available at the moment that I'm trying to apply things. So go back to our example on the service desk, and this also would apply to your colleagues throughout the organization using any application. Right? I'm in the middle of doing something, and I need to know right now how to do this thing. One of the examples, if you ever get a chance to hear Bob Mosher speak, it's well worth a while. He's very passionate about this, but he was speaking at a conference with Captain Scully, and the example that Scully uses, he lost one engine, and that's not good. He lost the second engine, and from then, I think, don't know exactly, a couple of minutes, 2-3 minutes, whatever it was that he remembered from his training, is how much time he's got left to put that plane down somewhere relatively safe. So he picks the Hudson, and he says, at that stage, what he does is reach under his seat, pull out a checklist, hand it to the co-pilot, and say, read me this. Now, he's been through, umpteen simulations. He's trained for this pretty much his whole life. This is the emergency situation. He falls back to the training because he knows there's a process or a process. He knows that there's a procedure he has to follow. There are steps he needs to follow. But what he says is, I didn't pull out the training manual and say, in this course, you will learn. Flip to the index, try to find all that stuff, right? It needs to be embedded in that workflow and readily available exactly when I need it. It has to be contextual. So that may be according to specific roles, and there may be varying needs for access. So not only does it have to be embedded in the workflow, but based on who I am and what I'm trying to do, you need to provide that information to me. So once again, today's topic, we're trying to say, well, how do I evolve the service desk from a support center to a learning center? And you'll see this starting, I hope, to come back around and make some connections. So if I can provide this information to the people I'm supporting, and it's embedded in their workflow, and based on who they are, they have ways to find the right answers much more consistently and within 2 clicks and 10 seconds, then you can start to see where the reliance on me is starting to lower. And we'll talk about the role of the service desk and how it moves from being that support to the learning side as we continue to go through the presentation. But hopefully you're starting to see these connections. It needs to be just enough. So if you use the Captain Scully example, right, I don't need a manual. I don't need any learning course, certainly, and I'm not calling the support desk. Right? I need a checklist, and it needs to be in a form that I can use right now, and I have to be able to execute on those steps. And I don't want anything. I don't want any superfluous. It's a hard word to say. Information. Just give me the steps that I need right now to perform this task. And while that's an extreme example, I think what you can probably relate to is the kinds of calls you'll get on the service desk, right? I'm trying to do this. I've got to print this document right now because the legal partner has got a court date 90 minutes across the street, and we got to print this document out, and the margins aren't printing right, or this table's messed up inside the document, and so we're, as a support person, we're the ones who are fielding sort of those irate calls. And it's got to be just enough, and it's got to help them execute on that task when they need it. So how is this all connected? And I kind of have this slide about the knowledge life cycle to try and bring this around for everyone. So if you look at performance support, systems as the center of this particular case universe, then what happens is when we're trying to teach people, there is some kind of prerequisite training. So if you've ever been involved in a role where the prerequisite training or the preliminary training wasn't planned properly or budgeted or executed on, then you know what I'm talking about, right? So, you know, a flood of calls into the desk because our colleagues are unprepared. Basically, don't know what this changes, don't know how to do what I used to do, this is all new to me, or gee, I took the class, but I can't remember, or, you know, it wasn't adequate. So we have to start there, and that has to be part of those project plans. And so we take that prerequisite training. In many cases, we want to follow that up with some kind of classroom or webinar. So study some stuff on your own. You know, I don't want to spend time in the classroom teaching people about the concepts of why are we doing this and that kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily want to have them see if it's an application, have them see the application for the first time in the classroom. I mean, we can do simulations and we can put sandboxes out there, all kinds of things, right? In the classroom, I want to use the facilitator's time wisely. So I've got a subject matter expert facilitating a classroom session, and some of that is dealing with the emotional systems with people, right? Hey, here's the reasons this new system or this new process is going to be great. Here's what's in it for you. Let's give it a try. It's not that hard. I'm going to make you feel comfortable. Dealing with people's exceptions, right? Well, yeah, I took the e-learning course, but, you know, it doesn't show me how to do the, I don't do it that way. I do this. Oh, okay, well, here's how you handle the exception. That stuff is best dealt with live. Learning from their peers, sharing, right? All that kind of stuff. That's great. You know, then the application gets launched, and there's some connection, if we want to make this contextual embedded in the workflow, between the application and the performance support system. So here's where we're taking all of that documentation from the pre-training, from the system documentation, and the process flows, information we might have used in the webinars, and tying it back to performance support. If you do this correctly, what happens, and lots of cases we've seen, big companies who in the training world are sort of put on pedestals like Disney and McDonald's are using these techniques. So the classroom time is driven way down because in class I'm not going through a 100-page manual with you with a bunch of screenshots and step-by-step instructions and exercises. In fact, if I'm doing any exercises, ideally what I'm doing is pointing to those from the performance support system, teaching people where to find the answers and how to get the answers out of the performance support system, and getting them reliant, excited about, and interested in how that system works. And that then is tied to the application so that when they get back to their desk or their tablet or whatever it is they're using in the field, they know from within the application, hey, if I get stuck, here's where I can go to get the answers, and it's actually going to be faster and easier because I've seen it before. And I'm going to try that first before I call the support desk because I saw that in class and I remembered it was pretty easy to get the answers. There is a connection, though, back to the support desk, which in fact becomes a learning desk, and this is part of how that transition helps. So in the first place, as a service desk, if I'm engaged in the project early enough, I'm engaged in helping build, define, and look at the performance support system because I needed to learn the subject matter to be able to support it. So I've helped create that content and the construct of that content. I know where everything is. As support comes through, and it will continue to come through, then I can help close the loop back to the performance support system. Hey, this documentation, those steps aren't quite right. Or back to the learner, gee, I'll tell you how to do that. I'll step you through the steps. And by the way, I'm going to send you a link to where those steps are in the performance support system. If you forget again next quarter, because you only do this once a quarter, just keep this link and you'll click and click on that link and it'll take you to the steps. And obviously in today's world, you know, with most applications, maybe all applications, we don't print manuals anymore. You know, lots of people still printing manuals for classroom events. Those can go away too because all of that documentation becomes stored centrally, electronically. It's retrievable, it's searchable, and all that good stuff. So conceptually, what we're doing is we're giving people just enough information to get the job done. So if we look at this pyramid, there are increasing levels of support as we go down the pyramid. The first few levels of support, we're talking about context, process, scenario, role, timelines, tasks, right? What are the steps? What are the things I need to do? And maybe there's some supporting knowledge that's underneath that, and I'll kind of look at all of those things. Then we want to link back to all of the source documentation that we would normally expect to see with the rollout of an application or a new process or whatever that might be. Hey, there's job aids, there's documentation, and that's stored in our document management system. There's policies around this, there's FAQs on the intranet site. There's all kinds of learning resources that may have been used in those first two stages, right? So there's practices, simulations, there's e-learning, there's recorded webinars, and then we may have, if we're fairly innovative or up to speed, we may have wikis, blogs, discussion groups internally, all that kind of stuff of people who are connected to this community. So in the training world, we call them centers of practice, right? So all of the people who use, if you use a service desk analogy, all the people who use your ITSM tool, maybe it's subgroups, all the people who are involved in incident management or change management, they may have their own blog, wiki, whatever kind of chat group you set up internally on an intranet site, whatever tool you're using. We can link back to those from performance support so that as I move down this pyramid, I may say, man, I can't be the only person who's struggling with how to do this properly in the software, how this process works. Hey, I can drill all the way back out and find out if anybody else is talking about this stuff. So what does this look like? It's probably a next logical question. And what it looks like is, at least in the example I'm going to talk about today, more than just online documents and online searchable reference material, and more than just context-sensitive help. So proper performance support systems actually give you some variation of the tabs that we're looking at here, right? So what's the process? What are the steps? What are the details behind the steps? Can I go look at the documentation, the user guides? And hey, is there some interactive instruction, simulations, that kind of stuff? In sophisticated implementations, then these things are tied back to seamless logins and so on. So I may get the user guide. I may be getting that from the document management system where it is stored and managed according to policies and procedures that we set up over the last 5 or 10 years in terms of how we manage documents in mature organizations. If I'm looking at an interactive instruction, it might be that I'm seamlessly passed back to the learning management system so we can actually track the fact that I took the course. Because what may happen is I may come in at a fairly high level. If I come in and I'm looking for these steps and or the details on how to execute, if I'm doing my job and I keep seeing those same things, and eventually what happens is I kind of tweak and I say, maybe there's a course on this because I keep looking it up and I don't really understand why I'm doing this. Oh yeah, I joined the company in May. There was a training session in February and there's not another one scheduled to September. So guess what? I can do the e-learning or I can watch the recorded webinar and I can be driven to all of that from a performance support perspective from one central location. So this really becomes my go-to place. So let's take a look. I'll field any questions if there are right now, and then I'll show you some samples of what that looks like in real life.
No, you know what, John? It's a good flow right now. I know there's enough there's some significant content, so it's 12:30. So I'll just let you keep going. There's not any posted questions yet.
All right, great, fantastic. All right. So let's take a look at one example. This is from a fast food restaurant environment. And, you're looking at a typical kind of application where, I'm logged in as a particular user, and this is employee management time scheduling kind of thing, right? So here, who's scheduled for the restaurant on what days of the week and so on. So when I clicked on help, what happens is I get a help window that pops up. So context-sensitive help we've seen before, right? That's not new to us. And we know we can take our system documentation and we can embed that. So the question is, what's different between that and performance support? Once again, now we get back, remember that pyramid, now we get back to looking at saying, well, context-sensitive help might be this, right, this one tab. And that's cool. I mean, I can look and I can see here's all the steps I need to do to execute on that task. But if I miss that training session, I look and I say, I really don't, I need a little more help than that. So what are the detailed steps? Oh, here we go. One step at a time with the screen captures and explanations of everything that I need to do in here. Okay, yeah, that's good, right? So far I haven't had to call a support desk on this. I'm getting to where I needed to be. And in true performance support implementations, that is context sensitive. That is, it's based on the screen that I'm looking at, and it may also be role-based. Now remember, I said we can link out to other resources here. So there may be other resources where I say, hey, I need to learn a little bit more about one of these topics. Or it may be that I get the steps, but based on the way I learn, I'm actually much more of a visual learner, and I'd like to see the simulation, right? So this is, I think, a Captivate or some other simulation tool that's been used, right? And it's going to step me through and show me. And as I said before, in sophisticated implementations, I could link this back actually to the learning management system, and I could take the e-learning course now. So if you think about the connection back to the learning desk or transforming the service desk to a learning desk, then what we're really doing here is we're saying, hey, what's my role? If I'm really looking at trying to manage down my call volumes, increase my efficiency, then what I want to do is proactively look at the processes and or the applications that are driving most of that call volume. And I want to see how, from a performance support perspective, our organization could get all of this documentation and support material centralized and brokered. The concept we use is basically knowledge brokering. In a lot of cases, the stuff's out there. There's a user's guide. There's context-sensitive help. There's already some screen captures or simulations that were created when the training was rolled out. There's classroom material. There may be blogs or wikis, FAQs, all that stuff. But remember that 2 clicks, 10 seconds. Right? People aren't going to go get that. They're just going to call us on the service desk. If we transform to a learning desk, we help create this environment, and we reinforce the use of the environment. So the next time a major application gets rolled out, we say, hey, let's do this properly. Let's structure all of that content in a performance support mode. Let's make it context sensitive. Let's build it into the workflow. And then from a service desk, we're going to do 2 things to become a learning desk. A, when we get the calls, we're going to link people back consistently. We're going to validate this content. Are those steps correct? Yep, those are the steps that just work for the user. I'm going to now send them a link and say, hey, next time that happens to you, do this. When you do your expense report next month. And if you forget again, here's the link. No need to call us. This will be faster and easier. You can print them out. Right? You'll notice there's a print button here, all that kind of stuff. So we're starting to close that loop, right? We're driving and reinforcing the learning, and we're playing an active role in making sure that the content is valid and updated consistently. And I'll show you a couple of tricks in this particular example how that happens. And the last thing is that we're looking at that from a learning perspective, and we're really helping to drive users, once again, to this central location, and we're doing analysis on our call volumes continuously, continuous improvement, big element of best practices on a service desk, right? So I'm looking and saying, where are the calls coming from now? What's the volumes? Hey, can we improve the documentation? Do we need to create a simulation? Do we need to create a webinar and then support it with performance support? So we become an active part of that learning environment, reinforcing the learning, improving, upgrading the learning, and all the time keeping one eye on the call volumes and what are the underlying causes of those volumes that we could address with performance support. And the last thing I'll show you here really quickly, we talked about roles and process flows. So if I take a look at this, I can say, hey, well, I'm an above store user, and it's the HR system I need to look at. There we are. Here's some process flows. Or I'm a general manager. These are all the things that I can do. I don't do this one. It's grayed out. What I need to do is manage a leave of absence. Oh, there's the flow. Yeah, it's changed the projected return to work. Now I think I violated my own rule. I probably was 3 clicks. Here's all the steps. Right? So once again, you'll notice it's only showing me what's available to support me. So in this case, there isn't a simulation, but if I want to see the detailed steps, I can. Right? So, and you'll notice that the windows I'm working in, I just size that they're sizable and so on. In high quality performance support environments, these windows actually reside on top. And if we have some time, we got a couple minutes, I'll show you another really cool thing that can be done. So last couple things I said, show you how we tie back to the service desk. So I can send feedback about this content, or I can send an email to someone. So if I'm on the service desk, then I take the support call, I may click on this button and send the email to the person I'm supporting so that they have it for the next time. If I see that there's something wrong, I may click on this button, say, hey, I just went through this with a user and, you know, step 1 says this, but really it's this. And so we can manage and update that documentation. The next time anybody goes to look at it, it's correct, which is often not the case. Most of the time what we see is people who are trying to help themselves and or people on the service desk. They'll search. If they can't find the document, they'll ask somebody. That person will email them the document, but that could be the document that they got 8 months ago. It's not necessarily the golden copy, if you will. So once again, we're driving this centrally. If you've got a system in place and those things are stored in the document management system, then we simply build the links to them. So I think you can start to see how all of that comes together. The other really kind of cool thing that you can do, in this case, this is actually based on Salesforce, probably the largest contact or customer relationship management application out there these days. And what you'll notice is when I come in here, I get kind of a welcome screen saying, hey, welcome to Salesforce. You should be doing a bunch of different things. So I can actually do some pushing with performance support. And in fact, right down to the point where I can actually use this to create business rules. So if I come in and have a look at the Lark Apparel Company, there's an opportunity here. So you notice the screen changed to opportunities. And then it actually, what the performance support system did in this case, it read these field values and it read the age of the opportunity and said, hey, you know what, this is stuck. And based on our process, there's some things you should be doing for a stuck opportunity. So you'll see how that all kind of stitches together. And you can imagine, again, transforming that support desk to a learning desk. You're looking at the kind of calls you're getting and saying, hey, if we created some business rules around these applications, then we could proactively tell people what to do and not have them have to call us and find out what to do. So let me pop back to my slideshow here really quickly. Hold on a sec. So the last thing I'll show you is you'll notice my support window is still up on top here, and you'll notice the other thing that it did is it's now telling me that you're in PowerPoint, and it's giving me some guidance on the things I could do here. So not only in this case is this particular performance support system context sensitive, it actually follows me across applications. So imagine then if I had that Salesforce application and one of the next things to do was create a Word document or whatever, I can follow my process flow and provide guidance across that process flow if it's done right. So much different than just having a document management system that's searchable or having context-sensitive help if we can, in fact, execute on true performance support. So I know we're getting a bit tight on time. I will get rid of this and just quickly talk about a couple of examples that we've seen. So in this case, a global systems integrator, 13,000 employees, supported by a single IT desk. The business challenge is they're onboarding 1,000 end users and help desk staff every year. Frequent launches of new applications, system upgrades, and the costs are rapidly increasing as the call volumes and durations are going up. So in their case, what they did is they put in some standard support content for MS Office. So imagine, Microsoft Help on steroids, content for SharePoint, and those things can then be customized for particular process flows and so on. they used learning, in this case, performance support for remote workers and for internal operations, HR, document management, ERP systems. What happens is that the monthly average hits, which were running around 50,000 and peaked at 80,000 hits, the kind of results that we saw here, a 12.5% reduction in call volume, so 10,000 a month, onboarding the 500 new employees. Call durations for the standard call types dropping significantly, although that wasn't measured in this case. In the case of the Office 2010 rollout, when they moved to the new system, there was an expectation based on history that they would need 10 FTEs over that period on the support desk, and that the requirement was only 2 FTEs. So significant labor savings in terms of that rollout.
Hey, John, there's a question, if I can interrupt you for a second. I think it was back a few slides, but does the service desk have a view of the support content?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 2 ways to do that. So one, in the particular example that I'm using in this tool, all of the content can be published. If you imagine taking all the contents available and creating a table of contents for different classes or different roles or users, then the support desk could see a particular view. But that's much more from an end user perspective. Depending on the organization and the permissions that are granted, the support desk may have the approval and authority to actually update the content. So once again, remember the concept of content brokering. If the performance support system is linking to documents in a document management system that the service desk is responsible for updating and maintaining, then clearly they have access to and are actually accountable for the maintenance of those documents. If it's systems documentation, then the service desk may or may not be the people accountable for that. They may just be providing feedback to whoever owns the systems and saying, hey, documentation needs to be updated. So if that answers the question or not.
Great, thanks.
No problem. So what you can see here, and I hope this ties things back for everyone in terms of the service desk, but we're looking at significant savings in the call center based on the number of calls and their fully loaded call cost of pretty close to $5 million a year. So that's a large organization, but clearly there are savings to be had from making this kind of a transformation. So that's it for the formal presentation. Don't know if there are any other questions or thoughts.
Just looking here, John, just give folks a few minutes to post if they have any other questions. So thank you very much for that. And just again, if anybody has any other questions, you can post them now in your go-to panel. You can post them in the questions area. We'll just kind of hang in here for a few more minutes. As well, if you have any other questions, so John, I don't know if you want to flip through to the next slide in terms of contact information. There's a couple things. I know when we've done this performance support session prior months that if there's typically some questions and follow-up that you might want to have with John directly. So there's a couple things you could do. One is you could send off an email to info@thoughtrock.net, and that will get to us, and we'll make sure that those get directly to John, and we'll make sure that he has his receiving these emails. And if you want to go to him directly, I don't know if there's a slide for that, but I'll tell everyone right now. It's john.towsley, Towsley, at B as in Bob, WYZE.com, ZE for some of you. So if you want to, you can. So either way, if you can get a hold of us and make sure that any questions or any additional information that you're looking for. John's got significant experience in this area, and this topic has been fairly hot in recent months in terms of trying to help organizations deal with the vast amount of information that they're trying to continuously update and train. So maybe worth a conversation. So John, other than the question around the support content, I know there's no other questions posted right now, so I think we can probably end the session there and say thank you very much again for doing that for us today. And we look forward to having you folks back on Thought Rock Live in the future, and stay tuned with your next newsletter for the next topic in the next Thought Rock Live session. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks a lot again, John.
Thanks, Rick.